Hey guys, how's it going, companion? So, Challengestone number 4 just happened, and I want to give you guys my little bit of insight on it because it is a tournament that I designed the rules basically, and it's one that gets quite a bit of an audience. So, yeah, maybe you guys, if you have missed it, maybe check it out. Maybe check out the next one. So, what is Challengestone? Challengestone is the idea that these days, tournaments really scrutinize the execution of specific decks. The best players who are, really experienced, really good at playing the same decks as their opponent usually end up winning. But the concept behind Hearthstone used to be that the best tournament players were not only the best players of their decks, but they also designed their own decks. They were also, part of the skill set of a great tournament player was the ability to design and create a new deck for a tournament. And that part of Hearthstone is gone, so we try to bring that back. So we run a tournament along with Challengestone, who helps us out, and we try to bring you guys a tournament where players are given a specific rule set and are given a specific amount of time to create decks on the spot, which they will then use to battle off in the tournament. And it matters, they're playing for monies, it's a real deal. And this time around, Challengestone number 4, it was the Grand Battle. Basically, with the rules, we had some pretty interesting decks. They had to make 3 decks. We made it Conquest. All the cards in every deck had to be epic or legendary or part of the TGT set. And this makes it so there's some very few options for early game, as TGT tried to really not give any tools to the aggressive decks, even though a few aggressive decks came out of TGT. There's really very few good 1-drops. There's very few good 2-drops, for instance. And because of the epic and legendary thing, there are a few 1, 2, and 3 drops kind of added from that, but generally there's not very many and they're not very good. So basically players had to make mid-rangey, inspiry decks and really supplement the fact that they couldn't run most of the base cards, they couldn't run very many spells with what TGT brought to each class. And TGT was a pretty big set, so in some way the power level of these decks wasn't really that low. It set up some pretty interesting stuff. Now let's just go through all the remainder of the rules. So of course, if players screw up, we got to have penalties, and we got to design the penalties. We got to be specific. Now this part of Challengestone 4, I really kind of started reflecting on the last few Challengestones, especially the first few, where I really punished players who made mistakes. I gave them just terrible cards in the decks, and I feel that really wasn't the best way to go around it. The thing is, when people design a deck, one thing is to include cards that are very powerful, but the other thing is to include cards that actually synergize and work together. And if they make a mistake, it breaks the synergy. And even if you're adding a pretty good card to their deck, it really is a liability in almost every case. So the penalties really didn't have to be that harsh. In the past, I think I just made them too harsh, and this time, as you can see from the penalty list, they are a little bit kinder. Millhouse Manastorm isn't too bad of a card, and with this idea, not only did I want to be kind of kind towards the penalties, but because the players, before they build their deck, they get to see the penalty cards, I wanted to perhaps inspire some of the players, give them some ideas, give them a little bit of a head start with what they can do in this type of format. So yeah, Millhouse Manastorm ended up not being too bad of a card because people really weren't able to run the base cards. They weren't able to run the really powerful set of spells in Hearthstone. And there's just not very many, and the ones that exist, most of them aren't very good. So Millhouse makes it so it very rarely, much more rarely than a ladder situation, gets punished. Take Master Overspark is another one. It's not a great card, but it's not a bad one because, removal is so premium in this type of Challengestone, and it's very difficult to actually silence something and remove it from play. Really, the only way to do that is Sylvanas. And, of course, that's why Sylvanas was literally in every single deck in the entire tournament. Because, it's really powerful. And going down the list, it kind of highlights this. Removal, healing is also premium in some cases. A card like a Grand Crusader can spawn some removal, which you might otherwise not have access to. So it makes it so it's really interesting. Now, I'm not going to go into what happened in the tournament. I'm only gonna do one spoiler this time, and you guys will have that in a moment. But really, I'm not spoiling anything. So if you guys want to check out the tournament after you see this video, don't worry about it. But I wanted to go over my decks so you guys can see what I came up with, because for every challenge that I design, I basically test it on myself. Actually, usually the time limit that I give the players is a little bit over double what I take. So my decks sometimes aren't as refined as some of the players, but I think I do a really good job still. And I think there's some insight into the design of challenges through my choices in making the decks. So I think it's a pretty interesting thing to review. And again, if you guys do want to try out these type of challenges with your friends, maybe it gives you guys some interesting ideas as well. So let's get to it. These are the decks that I made for this Challengestone. The first one is Shaman, and this is the spoiler, man. Nobody in the entire tournament actually played Shaman, and this was a pretty big surprise to me. The reason I picked Shaman, the reason, it wasn't like an obvious choice, but I think the reasoning is very sound. Out of all the classes, Blizzard really tried to push Shaman cards. They made not just good Shaman cards, but a lot of good Shaman cards. Now, very few of them actually ended up being overpowered, but they were still on a pretty high power level. And again, there were just a lot of them. So I thought the Shaman, because it got so much from TGT, it got the board clears with Elemental Destruction, it got the high power synergistic creatures with the totem stuff, with the Thunderbluff Valiant particularly. It even got like super good heals with Healing Wave. So there's just so many aspects that improved in the class that I thought more people would pick it. Certainly more people than zero. Just go over the list here. It is a fairly Inspire-driven deck that just included powerful cards. I included double Doomhammer because I realized that when I was playing one of my Malagos Shaman decks that had very few creatures, I was able to use 2 Doomhammers to clear out creatures constantly if I would consistently win the jousts. And this deck, a lot of the heavy minions, are there. Even though I'm playing against other powerful minions in other opponents' decks, it's not necessarily always going to win the joust, but I think it's fairly realistic that I can win maybe half the jousts at least. So Healing Wave is a very powerful card, and Healing Wave works very well with Molten Giant. There's very few comeback mechanics in this Challengestone, so being able to play Molten Giants and Healing Wave on yourself is a really big deal. There are not many taunts in the game, but I decided to include Black Knight because I thought there'd be a lot of paladins. It's one of the best ways to get rid of Tyrion. There's going to be a lot of cog hammers. And even though there's not many taunts, taunt is a really important aspect of this challenge because it's very difficult to come back in the game. There's like almost no board clears. There's almost no removal. So taunts is kind of like the natural progression. So I thought a lot of players would be playing taunts, and Black Knight would be a really powerful card in the set. Even though it might not work too frequently, that aspect might not be that important. Threw in a Sea Giant just because, it might be the case in Shaman. If I'm winning by enough, I can maybe get a discounted big creature. Even though a lot of players, including myself, thought Big Game Hunter was a very powerful card. Well, it is, but you can't really shy away from playing big creatures in this format. You just kind of gotta deal with it. One big thing that I also noticed was the Recombobulator. There's really very few good 2-drops, and Recombobulator is just a 3/2, which is basically on par with all the others. But Recombobulator is a very powerful 2-drop because it has a very strong late game effect. Whenever you have 8, 9, 10 mana cost cards, well, when you recombobulate them, it acts as a huge heal effect. It acts as a huge tempo swing in many situations, and sometimes you just get a ridiculous card that you otherwise wouldn't be able to have in your deck. So again, Shaman I think is one of the stronger classes out there. A little bit disappointing to see that nobody actually picked it, but I'm confident that it can work out if you guys do want to try out this challenge. My second deck, I think, was a very popular one, Druid. Druid is really strong, even though you don't have a lot of the ramp cards, even though you don't have really the strength of the Druid, which is, the base spells like Swipe and Wrath and ramp stuff again. There's a lot of that. It's still a class that has a lot of tools. It has a lot of taunts. It has a lot of ways to deal with the early game. Living Roots is probably the best 1-drop in the entire format. You still have some ramp with Darnassus Aspirant. You're playing Recombibulators, why not? Savage Combatant was a really big addition from TGT. In fact, that card is run in almost every Druid deck these days. I decided to include a Faceless Manipulator. Not too strong of a card. I think players were playing a lot of big minions, but not necessarily an overwhelming amount. So I think it's totally wrong to play like 2 Faceless. I think it's kind of wrong to play Faceless in every deck, but splash it in here and there. It's not too bad. I included Kel'Thuzad because I thought I could stay alive until that stage in the game, and my opponent probably won't be able to remove the board. So, well, I thought I could slow down the game enough to where that card would single-handedly win me the game. And yeah, Ancients. Pretty good in basically any format. In my last deck, another very popular one, Paladin. Coghammer was a very popular addition. Seal of Champions was extremely strong addition TGT. Murloc Knight, great mid-game, great late-game card. But one thing that I think was a bit overlooked was the Argent Lance. Argent Lance is a very powerful addition from TGT. It's considered one of the best cards in Arena for Paladin. But, it kind of goes a little bit under the radar because in Constructed, you don't really have that, you have like too many weapon options. So you can't run Argent Lance because, you're running so many other more or slightly more powerful weapons. But in this format where basically every 2-drop is a 3/2 creature or garbage, it just removes it so effectively. It's basically the best 2-drop in the entire format, I believe. And it just flows so well with the Paladin because if you start winning in the early few turns, suddenly your turn 4 Murloc Knight might not even get cleared and you win the game on the spot. Paladin's a great choice. You have all those tools. You have some healing from the Tuskar Jouster sometimes. And you have some form of board control. You had the option to play, Enter the Colosseum, but that card is kind of bad. Okay, a lot bad. But Yadric the Pure works in a similar way. And Tyrion's always going to have stopping power when people can't run silence or efficient removal. Overall, doing these type of challenge stones, doing this type of deck building stuff to try to test and come up with this stuff, it's really interesting. It really pushes the limits and lets me learn a lot of things about how the game works and how it would work if certain things would change in it. So it's a great, refreshing experience to come up with decks under these type of restrictions, and I highly encourage you guys to try. And again, if you guys haven't seen the tournament, make sure you do, because, well, Hearthstone is awesome in many ways more than what the game allows you to do in the current existing formats. So check it out. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.